Bones and Bones. We just left. Janner is taking Tink or Kalmar over to look at whatchamacallits. All right, we're getting ready to start. Bones and Bones. All right. Janner no longer bothered to walk in Kalmar's track. It didn't matter anymore. In the morning, whoever owned the chicken would discover the bloody mess in the coop, call the Durgan patrol, and follow the footprints straight to Chimney Hill. It wouldn't be hard to figure out that there were Kalmar's tracks, and then things would unravel. Janner wished it would snow again, enough to wipe the trail clean, to erase the knowledge of Kalmar's terrible hunger. But there wasn't a cloud in the sky. In fact, the sky was clearer than Janner had ever seen it. The stars vied with the moon for brightness and seemed close enough to pluck out of the heavens like apples from a tree. The boys could try to cover their tracks, but the Durgans weren't stupid. It would be obvious that someone had disturbed the snow. Janner also thought about running away, but of course, that would make it even more obvious, and it probably wouldn't save Nia from the dungeon, even if she weren't arrested. Her boys would be fugitives and she would never see them again. There was nothing to do but carry his grieving heart through the snow to whatever Kalmar had to show him. Every step was a silent farewell to Chimney Hill, and every minute brought him closer to the end of the peace he had found there. The boys followed. It's so pretty. Kalmar said nothing. His head hung low, and the dead hen left vivid specks of blood in the snow. He led Janner back the way they had come, and when they crested the last hill on the outskirts of the city, Janner could see the steep snow white roof of Chimney Hill in the distance. Kalmar paused and looked out at the moonlight valley. "It's so pretty," Kalmar said. Frost hung to the tips of his ears, and he dusted his fur that framed his face. Steam clouded out of his snout in little bursts. His black Durgan cape caught the moonlight. His brow shadowed his eyes with mystery. His back was bowed as if he'd carried a great weight, and Janner sensed his fight to bear it, and his sorrow that it had to be borne. Even with the dead hen drooping from his claw, he shone with a kingly grace. He smiled, and Janner had the sudden urge to bow. Janner's emotions swung like a pendulum between anger and awe, grief and confusion. One moment he was mourning his father's death, and the next he was happy for Rudrick. One moment he was frightened, and the next he was angry, and now he was awestruck by the undeniable truth of Kalmar's kingship. He would do nothing but hold his tongue and follow. The boys followed the road to the creek, crossed the bridge, climbed up to Chimney Hill, where Poto, Bonifer, and Nia and Lily slept. They crept past the house, and for one baffling moment, Janner thought Kalmar was going to bring the dead hen inside. But they passed Chimney Hill and slipped past Furva's cottage and the barn. Lily's dog stirred at the scent of hen meat and watched the brothers creep over the fence and down into the pasture. It wasn't long before Janner lost his bearings, especially with the snow repainting the landscape. He had a sense that they were heading east, but he couldn't be sure. Kalmar sniffed the air and strode ahead without hesitation. And now they were in the sparseness of the prairie. Neither of them bothered to keep quiet. Soon the rickety skeleton of the abandoned barn loomed ahead. Where were we at? Of the abandoned barn loomed ahead, and Janner recognized it. He remembered seeing a rooster perched in its rafters, but now the rooster was gone, like so many of the animals in the hollows. A stone throw away was beyond the old barn. The land fell away to a pond, an unfrozen black oval in the valley, white below bowl. Kalmar was taking him to the cave. Janner imagined it in the earth under his feet, dark and dripping, an empty place secreted from wind and sunlight and every good thing. He felt its hollow presence beneath the hill. Janner had read about dens like this, places where monsters made their homes, places where rockroaches lured animals to gobble them up, places where bomb doubles sucked the marrow from wolf bones and slept in the stench of the decay. Now he supposed it was Kalmar's den. The little wolf bounded down the slope and looked up at Janner from the bottom. Janner wanted to run away, back to Chimney Hill, duck under his blankets and pray this was all a nightmare. Whatever Kalmar had to show him in the cave was something Janner didn't want to see. He found himself staggering down the hill without meaning to, as if his legs knew his need for answers, and he drew him on in spite of his dread. He reached the bottom as Kalmar ducked through the entrance. Janner saw his tail disappear into the dark. He took a last look at the pond, the sinking moon, and the quiet stars, and then he crawled into the cave. As soon as he cleared the low ceiling and stood, he was slammed with a terrible stench. He gagged and staggered forward and felt things snapping under his boots. He heard a sound like the breaking of twigs, and he knew there were bones everywhere he stepped. Janner's vision starred in the utter darkness, and he fought to keep his feet. The last thing he wanted was to fall to that sordid floor. Kalmar grabbed Janner's elbow to steady him and said, "You look like you're going to throw up." Janner twisted out of Cal's grip and bent over with his hands on his knees. "It smells terrible in here," Janner panted. "How can you stand it?" "You'll see." Kalmar took Janner by the elbow again. "I'll guide you a few more feet and you'll have to step over the little creek." Janner straightened and pulled the collar of his cape over his mouth and nose. It helped a little. He stepped over the water and let Kalmar lead him deeper in. The smell worsened, as if it were getting wetter and warmer. He blinked away tears and said through the cloth over his face, "What have you done?" These were the first guys that were wearing masks. That's a joke. "What have you done?" "The only thing I could think to do." Kalmar replied, "Turn right and duck a little. We're almost there." I wonder where are they go? What's going on? Janner fumbled around the corner and ducked, still crunching bones with every step. Then he heard it. That's not what he heard. You know what he heard? It just doesn't make any sense to me. You're on here and you're not on here. That's the thing. When Janner found in the cave. So that chapter, last chapter, Kalmar wanted to show Janner something, but Janner was a little nervous about it. So Kalmar convinced him to come, and then they were in the cave about to find something out. We don't know what yet. So that'd be somebody wanted, but so then. And it's a nice way to summarize something. Now we're going to try to summarize this chapter. Somewhere in the darkness, something was breathing, but it wasn't ordinary breathing. It rattled and bubbled and wheezed, and now that Janner heard it, his mind wouldn't let him hear anything else. "Stay here, Kalmar. Stay here." Kalmar let go of Janner's elbow and crept deeper into the cave. Panic sizzled in Janner's chest, and he would have run if he had known which way to go. He may as well have been at the bottom of the ocean or buried in a tomb. If he dropped to all fours, he might have been able to navigate his way out, but that would mean crawling on the slick, bone-rotten floor. Kalmar murmured a few indistinguishable words, and the rhythm of the thing's breathing changed. It grunted and snuffled. Kalmar said something else, and the thing gurgled something close to a word. Then Janner felt Kalmar's hand on his elbow again. Ready? Is that what I think it is? Well, what do you think it is? A cloven? Janner whispered. Not just a cloven, Kalmar said. It's the one we saw. From the window? Janner tried to remember how long it had been since they'd seen it. 2 months at least. Not long after they had arrived. I found it in the cave, Kalmar said. It was wounded. Wounded? How? It was hard for Janner to clear his mind enough to remember the details from the night so many weeks ago. The Durgan patrol. Remember Rudrick told us that they heard it? He said that it would either run back to Blackwood or find some place to die. Kalmar paused. Well, this is it. I showed you the cave, remember? And this thing was in here that day? Yes. And I wanted to show you, but I got scared. I thought you would be mad at me. You should have told someone, Cal. But if I told anyone, they would have come in here and kill it. I couldn't let them do that. I saw its eyes that night from our window, remember? I saw something in its eyes that scared me worse than anything. Kalmar swallowed, then whispered, I saw myself. The cloven grunted. Janner heard bones crunching and a sound like the stirring of noodles in a pot, and he realized the thing was moving, crawling closer. I couldn't just let it die, Janner, and I couldn't let them kill it. What was I supposed to do? It's coming, Janner said. Bones snapped. The cloven huffed and mewed from just a few feet away. Janner felt its breath on his face. He imagined sagging flesh and twisted fangs. He saw it in his mind, lurching closer with its knotty jaw dropping open. I had to take care of it, Kalmar continued. It started with wild animals. It wasn't hard to hunt down a flabbit or a hen out on the prairie. No one noticed. I even found a few wild goats. I thought I would help it get better and convince it to go back to the Blackwood. But it was hurt worse than I realized. There was a spearhead lodged in its back. I pulled it out and tried to bandage the wound, and I even used some of that gad ball Mama gave you. But for days it bled and bled. I thought it was going to die. Janner heard it sniffing just inches away. He knew it. If he reached out, he could feel the moist skin of its face as it smelled him. Janner wanted more than ever to flee, but he knew it was useless. But it didn't die. It still hurt, and it's got a little better. And the better it got, the hungrier it got. I hunted all the way to the wooded vales near Van Yorna, but I couldn't find any more wild animals. I knew it was wrong, but you have to believe me, Janner. I couldn't let it starve, and I couldn't let them kill it. Janner felt something moist and cold touch the side of his face. It was all he could take. He screamed and careened backward, crushing into the wall and then to the ground. The cloven moaned and withdrew to the rear of the cave. Janner sat on the muck of the floor, panting, wiping his cheek with the back of his glove. Kalmar, I want to get out of this place now. Kalmar sighed. We can go. I just wanted you to know why I took the animals. I'm sorry about all this. Please, Cal, get me out of here. Kalmar spoke to the cloven. I have to go. No one is going to feed you anymore. You're well enough now. It's your time to go back to the Black Wood. The monster grunted. Do you understand? I have to go. I can't come back. It grunted something that sounded like a question. Surely the thing couldn't understand what Cal was saying, could it? Go back to the Black Wood. They won't hurt you there. And there's plenty of food. It wasn't almost morning, so wait until tonight and go back. Please? Cal's voice trembled with emotion. Goodbye. The cloven howled mournfully and approached, and Janner knew that Kalmar was hugging it, crying into its shoulder. The monster's howls turned to a pitiful wail, and the cave seemed to shake with the sound of sadness. Janner heard Kalmar pull away, and then the little wolf took Janner's hand and pulled him to his feet. When the boys turned the corner, a hint of blue pale light was visible a little way ahead. The cloven wept and wept, but by the time they reached the exit, the monster was barely audible. Danner dropped to his hands and knees, so glad to leave that he didn't care about the bones on the floor anymore. He scrambled out, gulping in clean air as if he'd been underwater. A moment later, he realized the light wasn't from the moon at all. A band of gold showed in the east. Dawn had come to the green hollows. Kalmar appeared, his face slick with mud and tears, and sat on his haunches. I always took a dip in the pond to wash off the smell, Cal said, looking out at the cold water. The boys sat for a moment in the silence of the waking day. Danner could think of nothing to say. He didn't blame Kalmar. He was only 11 years old after all. It was hard enough to survive even without Nag the Nameless, the fangs ruining your life at every turn. Danner tried to imagine what he would have done in Kalmar's place, and he doubted if it would have been much different. What was done was done. Now they had to get home and tell Nia. She would know what to do. Danner said, "Come on, Cal. Let's get back to Chimney Hill while we still can." Kalmar bowed his head and rested on his forearms, still sniffling. "What's going to happen?" "God, the Maker only knows." Danner saw a flicker of movement at the top of the hill. "But we need to get home right now." He heard the snap of a twig in the weeds beside the pond. The Durgan patrol had found them. If it wasn't the Durgans, someone had found them. It was over. At the first ray of sunlight reached the top of the hill, Danner saw a face he recognized, stretched with wicked satisfaction. Gregory Bungee. The boy stood, and Danner saw that he had a bow with an arrow already knocked on the string. Movement flitted somewhere to the left. That meant at least 3 people, probably more. They were going to ambush Kalmar, and Kalmar was going to fight. If that happened, the Durgans would kill the Gray Fang in their midst. Not only that, if the cloven heard and came to Cal's rescue, there was no telling what would happen. There was only one thing he could do. "Kalmar, don't fight me!" Cal lifted his head and narrowed his eyes. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Now!" someone screamed, and Hollow's folks rushed down, screaming. "Now!" someone screamed, and Hollow's folks rushed down the hill. Oh, now we're going to go back to Sarah next chapter and the maintenance manager. That'll be exciting. So now we ask our question. Ooh, I could copy streaming link. Oh, sweet. I wonder if that works. You guys could get on and listen to me on YouTube. Now you can click on that link I just sent though. You guys are a little crazy in chat. That's why I can't keep doing chat. The question is, how would you summarize that chapter? Somebody wanted, but so then you could try that. Now it won't work in every single chapter. There won't be all that work, but you can do some of those things, and you need to do it on Wednesday. Go do it. Yes, yes.